I'm Harper Wilson, 26 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was just an ordinary software engineer. My grandfather, William Wilson, was a self-made tech billionaire who I adored. When he died unexpectedly, I was devastated. What I never anticipated was inheriting his entire $7 billion fortune, or how quickly money would reveal my parents' true colors. Their supportive facade crumbled into manipulation, betrayal, and eventually, all-out war. Before I share this painful journey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if family drama stories keep you coming back. I grew up in Seattle in what I'd call an upper-middle-class family. We lived in a nice neighborhood, I went to good schools, and we took decent vacations. From the outside, everything seemed comfortable, but there was always an undercurrent of financial tension in our household that I didn't understand until much later. My grandfather, William Bill Wilson, had a remarkable life story. He grew up dirt poor in rural Idaho, the son of a factory worker and a waitress. Through sheer determination, he put himself through college working 3 jobs, eventually earning a computer science degree when the field was just emerging. In his garage, he built one of the first successful database management systems that eventually evolved into Wilson Tech, now a Fortune 500 company worth billions. What made my relationship with Grandpa Bill special was how different it was from his relationship with my parents. My father, Robert Wilson, was Grandpa's only child. Dad always seemed to view his father's wealth as an entitlement rather than the result of decades of hard work. My mother, Elizabeth, came from old money that had mostly dried up before I was born, and she had certain expectations about lifestyle that never aligned with my grandfather's practical nature. Money that comes too easily loses its value, Grandpa used to tell me. It was one of his many sayings that made little sense to me as a child but resonates deeply now. While my parents constantly asked Grandpa for loans to cover their extravagant spending, a vacation home in Aspen, matching BMWs, country club memberships, I developed a genuine bond with him based on shared interests. When I was 12, he gave me my first programming book and stayed up late helping me build my first website. By 15, I was interning at Wilson Tech during summers, fascinated by the business my grandfather had built from nothing. "You remind me of myself," he told me once while we were fishing at his modest cabin on Lake Washington. It was one of his favorite compliments. "You see value in creation, not consumption." My parents resented these fishing trips and coding sessions. They couldn't understand why I preferred spending time learning from Grandpa rather than shopping with Mom or playing golf with Dad at their exclusive club. They called him tight-fisted behind his back when he questioned their requests for money, never acknowledging that his occasional refusals came from wisdom, not meanness. The last conversation I had with Grandpa happened just 2 weeks before his death. I had just landed my dream job at a promising startup, turning down a higher-paying corporate position because I believed in the company's mission. "I'm proud of you for making that choice," he told me over coffee at his favorite local diner. He always preferred simple establishments over fancy restaurants. "Remember, Harper, life will present you with moments where you'll need to choose between what's easy and what's right. Always choose wisely." At the time, I thought he was just offering generic life advice. I had no idea he was already putting the finishing touches on his will, or that his cryptic words would become my guidepost through the storm that was coming. Despite my family connections, I lived modestly in a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood. I drove a used Honda Civic and had student loans for my computer science degree that I insisted on paying myself, despite my parents' confusion about my unnecessary struggle, as they called it. "Why live like you're broke when your grandfather is loaded?" my mother would ask, genuinely perplexed by my insistence on making my own way. The truth was, I never counted on Grandpa's money. I wanted to build something of my own, just like he did. I had no idea that the universe had different plans. I was debugging code at work when I got the call. Grandpa had suffered a massive heart attack at his office. At 78, he still went to work most days, still innovated, still loved what he did. By the time I made it to the hospital, he was gone. The grief hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just lost my grandfather, I'd lost my mentor, my friend, and the one person in my family who truly understood me. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and funeral arrangements. My parents took charge of planning an elaborate service that seemed at odds with Grandpa's modest nature, but I was too overwhelmed to object. It wasn't until the lawyer called about the will reading that I began to sense something significant was about to happen. The will reading was scheduled for exactly 1 week after the funeral at the downtown Seattle offices of Hamilton and Partners. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots, not from anticipation of any inheritance but from the finality of it all. This was the last official act of my grandfather's life. The reception area of the law firm screamed old money with its dark wood paneling and leather chairs. I sat quietly, watching as other family members arrived. My parents entered together, both dressed immaculately in designer morning attire. My father's brother, Uncle James, who had occasionally worked for Grandpa's company in sales but never quite succeeded, nodded stiffly in my direction. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister who lived in Portland and rarely made appearances at family gatherings, arrived last, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. When Mr. Gregory Hamilton, Grandpa's attorney for over 40 years, ushered us into the conference room, the tension was palpable. Everyone took seats around the polished conference table while Mr. Hamilton prepared his documents at the head. I couldn't help but notice how my parents positioned themselves directly across from him, as though proximity might somehow influence what was about to be revealed. "Thank you all for coming today," Mr. Hamilton began, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone who had delivered both good and devastating news throughout his career. William was not only my client but my dear friend for many decades. He put great thought into the distribution of his estate. I watched my father straighten in his chair, adjusting his gold cufflinks, a gift he'd pressured Grandpa into buying for his 50th birthday. My mother reached over and squeezed his hand, a small smile playing at her lips. The expectation radiating from them was almost tangible. "Before I begin the specific allocations," Mr. Hamilton continued, "William asked me to share some words with you." He opened a letter and began to read, "The accumulation of wealth has never been my primary goal in life. What matters is what one does with resources, how they are stewarded, grown, and used to impact the world positively. I have made my decisions based on who I believe will honor these principles." I saw my father nodding solemnly as though Grandpa's words were specifically endorsing him. Uncle James fidgeted with his watch, while Aunt Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Hamilton cleared his throat and began detailing smaller bequests, charitable donations, gifts to longtime employees, and a generous pension for Grandpa's housekeeper of 30 years. Then came the moment that would change everything. "And now to the primary distribution of assets," Mr. Hamilton said, glancing up from his papers. "To my son, Robert Wilson, and his wife, Elizabeth Wilson, I leave the sum of $2 million each, with the stipulation that these funds be placed in managed trusts with quarterly distributions to ensure long-term security." The room went completely still. $2 million was certainly not a small amount, but considering the Wilson fortune was estimated at over $7 billion, it represented barely a fraction of a percent. My father's face flushed red, while my mother's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself out of water. Before anyone could react further, Mr. Hamilton continued, "The remainder of my estate, including controlling interest in Wilson Technologies, all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and private assets, totaling approximately $7 billion at current market valuation, I leave to my granddaughter, Harper Wilson." The words hung in the air for several seconds before their meaning penetrated my shock. $7 billion. To me. Not my father, the only son. Not split among family members. Just me. "This can't be right," my father finally sputtered, breaking the silence. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, Robert," Mr. Hamilton replied calmly. "William was extremely clear about his wishes." "But she's just a child," my mother exclaimed, though at 26, I certainly wasn't. "Harper has demonstrated the values, judgment, and character that William believed essential for managing his legacy," Mr. Hamilton replied firmly. The decision was made after considerable thought. What followed was a blur of legal details, explanations about the various companies, properties, and investments I now controlled, the transition plan for Wilson Tech's management, and the structure of the charitable foundation that came with specific directives from Grandpa. I barely heard any of it. I felt disconnected from my body, as though watching the scene unfold from somewhere near the ceiling. When the formal reading concluded, my family sat in stunned silence. Then, like actors taking their positions on stage, they seemed to simultaneously compose themselves and turn to me with plastered-on smiles. "Well, congratulations, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice strained. "What a surprise." "Yes, congratulations," my father added, the words clearly painful for him to pronounce. "Your grandfather always did think highly of you." Uncle James and Aunt Patricia offered similarly stilted congratulations before quickly making their exits, both clearly processing the shocking turn of events. As the room emptied, Mr. Hamilton asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he revealed another layer to Grandpa's decision. "Harper, your grandfather wanted me to share his reasoning privately," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "He believed you were the only one who truly understood the responsibility that comes with wealth of this magnitude. He also..." Mr. Hamilton hesitated. "He also had concerns about your parents' financial judgment. There's a history there you may not be fully aware of." I nodded numbly, clutching the envelope. I had no idea he was planning this. That was intentional. William didn't want his decision influenced by anticipation or manipulation. He watched you forge your own path, make responsible choices, and demonstrate genuine interest in his life's work. Those observations guided his decision. The drive home was excruciating. My parents insisted we all go together, claiming they wanted to support me through this shocking news. But the atmosphere in the car was charged with unspoken tension. "We're so proud of you, Harper," my mother said, turning from the passenger seat to face me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And we're here to help you manage all of this. It's overwhelming, I'm sure." "Absolutely," my father agreed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You'll need advisors you can trust. Family who have your best interests at heart." I murmured noncommittal thanks, still too stunned to formulate coherent thoughts about what had just happened or what their words really meant. But a small voice inside, one that sounded remarkably like Grandpa, whispered a warning about the storm gathering on the horizon. A week after the will reading, my parents insisted on hosting a family dinner at their suburban Seattle home. I'd been avoiding their calls, needing space to process everything that had happened, but finally relented. The moment I arrived, I sensed an agenda behind their unusual attentiveness. The dining room was set elaborately with their finest china and crystal, items usually reserved for impressing my father's business associates. Mom had prepared my favorite meal from childhood, beef stroganoff, though I'd been vegetarian for 3 years, a fact she conveniently forgot. "We wanted to celebrate your inheritance properly," my mother explained, pouring expensive champagne. "Just the 3 of us. Family." They waited until dessert to begin their carefully choreographed approach. "Harper, honey," my mother started, setting down her fork delicately. "We've been thinking about your situation. It's such a blessing, but also such a responsibility for someone so young." My father nodded solemnly. "Your grandfather clearly trusted you, and that's wonderful. But managing billions requires experience and connections." "I'm planning to keep Grandpa's management team in place while I learn," I replied cautiously. "Mr. Hamilton introduced me to the CFO yesterday." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "That's a start, dear. But you were raised to share your blessings. Remember how we always taught you that family comes first?" There it was, the first card in their hand, played with practiced precision. "We made so many sacrifices for you growing up," she continued. "Your private school, those expensive computer camps, the college tuition." "Which Grandpa paid for," I interjected quietly. My father's expression tightened momentarily before smoothing into concern. "What your mother means is that we've always wanted what's best for you. We devoted our lives to raising you, and now we want to help you manage this responsibility." "I appreciate that, but I need time to figure things out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Grandpa left detailed instructions, and there are excellent advisors already in place. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping. Harper, there are things you don't understand about financial matters of this magnitude. Your grandfather, bless his heart, may have overestimated your readiness. The conversation escalated as their thinly veiled suggestions gave way to more direct approaches. They began detailing alleged financial troubles they'd never mentioned before, investments gone wrong, property taxes they couldn't afford, credit card debt accumulated from maintaining appearances for the family's sake. The vacation home in Aspen is in danger of foreclosure, my mother said, dabbing at manufactured tears. After all the wonderful family Christmases we've had there. We'd visited that house exactly twice in 5 years, and both times they'd spent most of the trip networking with wealthy neighbors rather than spending time together. My business partners backed out of our latest venture, my father added grimly. I'm personally liable for nearly $1 million. The convenient timing of these financial disasters wasn't lost on me, but seeing my mother's tears and my father's grave expression made me waver. These were my parents, after all. I could help with some of these immediate issues, I offered cautiously. But I need to understand exactly what's needed. Their expressions brightened instantly. By the end of the evening, I had agreed to pay off what they claimed was $500,000 in pressing debts, a fraction of what I now possessed, but still a significant amount that I hoped would give them security while maintaining appropriate boundaries. 3 days later, I got my first real lesson in what Grandpa must have observed about my parents' relationship with money. Driving to a meeting with the foundation directors Grandpa had appointed, I passed a luxury car dealership. Prominently displayed in the front window was a photo of my parents posing with matching brand-new Bentleys, with a congratulatory sign thanking them for their purchase. The cars had to have cost at least $300,000 each, more than half of what I'd given them to resolve their crushing debts. When I called my father to ask about it, his explanation came too quickly. Just leases, sweetheart. Excellent terms. Image is important in my business, you understand. But I did understand, finally. I understood exactly what my grandfather had seen in them, and why he had structured his will the way he did. This wasn't about choosing a favorite, it was about protecting his legacy from being squandered. The realization left me with a sick feeling that this was just the beginning. 2 months after the inheritance, I had begun working with a team of financial advisors and philanthropic experts recommended by Mr. Hamilton. We were crafting a responsible approach to managing the enormous wealth I'd been entrusted with, focusing on sustainable growth for the companies, strategic philanthropic initiatives, and continuing my grandfather's legacy of innovation in technology. I had just finished a promising meeting about establishing a scholarship foundation for underprivileged students interested in STEM fields when my phone began buzzing with text messages from both parents. Coming to your place to discuss exciting opportunity. Be there in 30. Bringing dinner. Important family business to share. I hadn't given them a key to my apartment, thankfully, but their presumptuous announcement left me uneasy. Sure enough, they arrived with expensive takeout from my favorite sushi restaurant and an air of barely contained excitement that had nothing to do with family bonding. We've been doing some thinking, my father announced once they'd arranged the food I hadn't asked for. About how to grow your inheritance in ways that would make your grandfather proud. My mother nodded enthusiastically. We found an incredible investment opportunity. Absolutely groundbreaking. What followed was a convoluted explanation of a revolutionary tech startup that needed just $50 million in seed funding. My father claimed to have inside connections with the founders, who were offering us a special opportunity to get in early before they went public. The returns could be 10 times the investment within 2 years, he insisted, sliding a glossy folder across the table. We could manage everything for you. All you need to do is sign. I opened the folder, finding vague projections and buzzword-filled descriptions but nothing substantial about the technology, leadership team, or market analysis. When I asked basic questions any investor would want answered, my parents exchanged glances. The details are confidential at this stage, my father explained impatiently. That's why this opportunity is so exclusive. I'd need my advisors to review this, I said, closing the folder. And meet with the company leaders directly. My father's face darkened. Don't you trust us? We're your parents. This isn't about trust. It's about due diligence. Grandpa would never invest $50 million without proper vetting. That's when the mask finally dropped completely. That money should have been ours in the first place, my father exploded, slamming his hand on the table. I was his son. His only child. Not you. My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked as well. You never deserved it. You were always his favorite for no reason. We raised you, sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay us? By questioning our judgment? The sudden shift from manipulative charm to raw anger left me speechless. These weren't the parents I thought I knew, these were strangers revealing their true faces for the first time. We could challenge the will, my father threatened, his voice cold. Claim he wasn't of sound mind. That you manipulated an old man who was losing his faculties. You wouldn't win, I replied, finding my voice despite my shock. Grandpa was sharp until the end, and there were witnesses. Maybe not, my mother said with a calculating expression I'd never seen before. But imagine the scandal, the dragged-out court battle, your character being questioned in public. Is that what you want? They left in a fury when I remained firm, my father's parting words hanging in the air. You'll regret this, Harper. Family should come before money, but you've made your choice. Later that night, scrolling through social media to distract myself from the painful confrontation, I discovered they had already begun their campaign against me. My aunt had posted about certain family members letting wealth go to their heads, with my uncle commenting that the older generation would be ashamed. Cousins I barely spoke to were suddenly sharing vague posts about entitlement and family betrayal. The coordinated attack shouldn't have surprised me, but it still felt like a physical blow. With shaking hands, I called my best friend Megan, the one person outside the situation I could trust. They're showing you who they really are, she said after I recounted the evening's events. And from what you've told me about your grandfather, he already knew. That's why he left everything to you. But they're my parents, I whispered, tears finally breaking through. How could they say those things? Do these things? Because $7 billion is a powerful motivator, Megan replied gently. The question is, what are you going to do now that you see the truth? I didn't have an answer yet, but as I hung up, I realized with crushing certainty that this was only the opening battle in what would become all-out war. The formal legal challenge to my grandfather's will arrived 3 weeks later. The document claimed William Wilson had been suffering from diminished capacity in his final months and that I had exercised undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. Reading the blatant lies on official legal paper made me physically ill. But the lawsuit was just the beginning. Suddenly, local business publications were running quotes from my father about his concerns for his father's legacy. As his only son, I simply want to ensure my father's wishes are truly honored, he told the Seattle Business Journal, portraying himself as the dutiful child protecting his father's interests rather than a man desperate for money. My mother took a different approach, giving a tearful interview to a Society magazine about how family dynamics had been weaponized against them. We just want what's best for Harper, she claimed. This amount of money would change anyone, and we're concerned about the influences around her. The public nature of their attacks was devastating. Former colleagues sent awkward messages asking if I was okay. Distant relatives took sides, most backing my parents simply because their version reached them first. Even my cousin Emma, who I'd been close with growing up, sent a cold text, "I never thought you'd put money before family." The isolation grew as the pressure mounted. I stopped going out except for essential meetings, had groceries delivered, and worked remotely. Each day brought new anxiety about what fresh attack would come next. Mr. Hamilton connected me with a specialized legal team experienced in contesting wills, but advised me that while we would likely win, the process could be lengthy and painful. They're betting you'll settle just to end the public spectacle, he explained grimly. During this darkest period, I made a decision that would ultimately change everything. If my parents wanted to fight dirty, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I hired a private investigator recommended by my security team to look into my parents' financial history. What came back shocked me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The report detailed a pattern of financial mismanagement spanning decades. Multiple failed business ventures my father had launched and abandoned, often leaving investors with losses. 6 maxed-out credit cards. 3 home equity loans on their primary residence. A pattern of borrowing money from friends and relatives without repayment. Tax liens from 2 years of unpaid property taxes. Most damning of all, the investigation uncovered that my parents had borrowed $1.5 million from my grandfather just 4 months before his death. The loan documents, signed by both of them, included repayment terms they had never intended to honor. But the most devastating discovery was evidence that while helping manage some of Grandpa's personal affairs during a brief hospital stay the year before, my father had transferred nearly $200,000 from my grandfather's personal accounts into his own. The transactions had been disguised as investment management fees, but there were no corresponding investments. The investigator explained that my grandfather had discovered these unauthorized transfers, which explained the strict limitations in the will. He hadn't just chosen me because he believed in me, he had also recognized that my parents couldn't be trusted with his money. Armed with this information, I instructed my legal team to request a meeting with my parents and their attorneys. The meeting was set for the following week at Mr. Hamilton's office, neutral ground. I spent the intervening days in a fog of grief and betrayal, coming to terms with the fact that the parents I thought I had never really existed. They had always seen me, and my grandfather, as means to financial gain rather than family to be cherished. When the day of the meeting arrived, I was surprised by my own calm. Something had shifted within me, the devastating pain had hardened into resolve. My parents arrived with 2 aggressive-looking attorneys, their expressions confident. They clearly expected me to cave under the pressure of the lawsuit and public scrutiny. My mother even managed a smug little smile as we took our seats in the conference room. "We're glad you've agreed to this meeting," my father began smoothly. "We believe we can resolve this unfortunate situation amicably." His attorney slid a document across the table. "We've prepared a very reasonable settlement proposal. Ms. Wilson transfers $1 billion to her parents, a mere fraction of the inheritance, and we drop all legal challenges. Everyone saves face, the family reconciles, and this unfortunate chapter closes." $1 billion. The number was so enormous it seemed almost comical. In what universe was that a reasonable settlement? "Before I respond to your offer," I said quietly, "I have something to share." I nodded to my attorney, who distributed copies of a bound report to everyone at the table. I watched my parents' expressions as they opened the documents and began to realize what they were looking at. "This is outrageous," my father sputtered, his face flushing. "Private investigators? Digging through our finances? Is any of it untrue?" I asked simply. The room fell silent. "You can contest the will if you want," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "But then all of this becomes part of the public record. The unauthorized transfers from Grandpa's accounts. The unpaid loan. Everything." My mother's attorney leaned over to whisper something in her ear. The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't do that to us," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're your parents. You stopped acting like parents the moment you realized Grandpa left his money to me," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "You've threatened me, publicly attacked my character, and attempted to extort me for $1 billion. What exactly should I be protecting at this point?" My father made one last desperate attempt. "Be realistic, Harper. You're nothing special. You just got lucky. Why not share that luck with the people who raised you?" The cruelty of his words should have hurt, but instead, they confirmed everything I needed to know. This man, my father in biology only, had never seen me at all. "My counteroffer is this," I said, closing my folder. "I will not pursue criminal charges for the unauthorized transfers if you immediately withdraw your challenge to the will, cease all public statements, and sign a non-disparagement agreement. You can keep the money I already gave you to pay your debts, despite how you actually spend it. Beyond that, you'll receive nothing more from me, ever. And if we refuse? My father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Then I'll see you in court, where I'll win, and then I'll refer the evidence of financial elder abuse to the district attorney. Your choice. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, with their attorneys requesting time to consult with their clients. But the defeat in their posture told me everything I needed to know. They had gambled and lost. 3 days later, my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment building. I refused to let them up, instead meeting them in the lobby with security present, a precaution my team had insisted upon. We've withdrawn our challenge, my father said tightly. The papers have been filed. We're still your parents, my mother added, attempting a tearful approach one last time. Surely we can work something out. We could start fresh. Looking at them, these people who had raised me but never truly loved me for who I was, I felt an odd sense of peace. The hardest decision had somehow become the clearest. No, I said simply. We can't. You ungrateful little, my father began, his mask slipping again. Please escort them out, I said to the security team. They are not to be admitted to this building again. As they were led away, my parents shouted accusations and threats that echoed through the marble lobby. Other residents stared, but I felt no embarrassment, only relief that the people who should have loved me most in the world had finally shown me exactly who they were, allowing me to finally let them go. The weeks following the confrontation were simultaneously the most difficult and clarifying of my life. With my parents' legal challenge withdrawn, the media frenzy gradually subsided, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. I fluctuated between crushing doubt: had I been too harsh? Were there signs I had missed throughout my childhood? And absolute certainty that I had done the only thing possible under the circumstances. I threw myself into work, spending 16-hour days learning about the companies I now controlled, meeting with executives, reviewing philanthropic proposals, and generally avoiding the gaping hole where my family relationships had been. Sleep became elusive, meals forgotten. My friend Megan eventually staged what she called a wellness intervention, showing up at my apartment with groceries and forcing me to take a day off. You're not honoring your grandfather by working yourself to death, she said bluntly while cooking dinner in my barely used kitchen. And you're definitely not proving anything to your parents by neglecting yourself. She was right, of course, but I didn't know how to process everything I was feeling. The betrayal, the grief, the overwhelming responsibility, it was too much to face all at once. The turning point came unexpectedly, through a lunch meeting with Thomas Blackwell, my grandfather's oldest friend and former business partner. They had started Wilson Tech together, though Thomas had sold his stake decades earlier to pursue other ventures. I had met him occasionally at company events but didn't know him well. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, he said as we settled at a quiet table in a restaurant my grandfather had frequented. Bill and I had standing lunch dates here for 40 years. I miss the old curmudgeon. Thomas was in his late 70s, with sharp eyes that reminded me of my grandfather. Over soup, he shared stories about their early days building the company, sleeping on office floors, eating ramen for weeks straight, the exhilaration of their first major contract. Bill wasn't always good with people, Thomas admitted. Brilliant with systems, terrible with emotions. That's partly why his relationship with your father was so strained. I set down my spoon, surprised. I always thought it was just about money. Thomas shook his head. It started long before Robert developed his spending habits. Bill worked constantly when your father was young. Classic first-generation entrepreneur mistake, thinking providing financially was enough. By the time he realized his error, your father had already formed his worldview. So you're saying it's Grandpa's fault my parents tried to legally extort me? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. No, Thomas said firmly. I'm saying family dynamics are complex, and the patterns get set early. Your father grew up equating money with love because that's what Bill knew how to give. When Bill finally tried to build a relationship with him as an adult, Robert only saw the money. He paused, studying my face. Bill was determined not to make the same mistake with you. He wanted to give you time, attention, knowledge, not just wealth. And look where that got us all, I murmured. Bill faced similar struggles, you know, Thomas said quietly. Not with his son, but with his brothers. When the company took off, they came expecting handouts, felt entitled to his success. When he refused to just write blank checks, they turned nasty. Stopped speaking to him. I stared at him, stunned. He never mentioned any brothers. Because it broke his heart, Thomas replied. But he never regretted establishing boundaries. He told me once that the money revealed who people truly were, it didn't change them. That conversation was the catalyst I needed. My grandfather had faced the same painful choices and had found a way forward. If he could build a meaningful life after such betrayal, so could I. The next day, I called Miranda Richardson, the fiercest litigator in Seattle, recommended by 3 separate advisors. She arrived at my office in a perfectly tailored suit, exuding competence. I don't need you for the will contest anymore, I explained after pleasantries. I need a comprehensive strategy for moving forward with ironclad protections. Together, we crafted a multi-pronged approach. First, a ceasefire. My parents had withdrawn their legal challenge, and I would not pursue charges for the financial improprieties we'd uncovered, provided they maintained absolute silence about me, the inheritance, and my grandfather. Second, protection, robust non-disclosure agreements for everyone involved in my business and personal affairs, enhanced security protocols, and a complete separation from any financial ties to my parents. Third, and most importantly, purpose, a clear vision for how I would honor my grandfather's legacy while creating my own. For the next month, I worked with a focused intensity that surprised even me. I prepared a comprehensive presentation of evidence documenting my parents' financial misconduct, not to use against them but to have ready if needed. I restructured the management team at Wilson Tech, bringing in diverse perspectives while retaining key personnel who shared my grandfather's values. I established clear boundaries with extended family, offering one opportunity to reset our relationships on honest footing. Most cousins and relatives didn't respond to my outreach, having already accepted my parents' version of events. But surprisingly, cousin Samantha, my father's brother's daughter, reached out with an unexpected message, I believe you. They tried the same manipulation tactics on my dad for years. This small alliance helped strengthen my resolve as the date approached for the final confrontation I knew had to happen. My parents had been suspiciously quiet since withdrawing their legal challenge, which my security team attributed to them regrouping rather than accepting defeat. Sure enough, 6 weeks after our lobby confrontation, they requested another meeting through their new attorney. Miranda advised against it, but I knew this festering wound needed one final cleaning before it could truly heal. I'll meet them, I decided. But on my terms, not theirs. We arranged for the meeting to take place at Wilson Tech headquarters, in the boardroom where my grandfather had made decisions for decades. I arrived early, sitting at the head of the table where he once sat, drawing strength from the symbolism. When my parents entered, I noticed immediately how different they looked. Gone were the designer clothes and confident postures. My father's suit seemed slightly rumpled, my mother's jewelry less ostentatious. The past months had clearly taken a toll. Thank you for agreeing to meet, my father began, his tone conciliatory. We've had time to reflect on our actions and realize we handled things poorly. My mother nodded earnestly. Family should come first. We lost sight of that in our shock and disappointment. I listened silently as they delivered what was clearly a rehearsed speech about reconciliation, forgiveness, and moving forward as a family. Had I not seen their true colors so clearly, I might have been moved by their apparent sincerity. When they finished, I opened a folder containing a single document, the final agreement Miranda had prepared. I appreciate your sentiments, I said calmly, but words are no longer sufficient. This document outlines the terms of our relationship moving forward. In exchange for my continued silence about your financial activities regarding Grandpa, you will maintain complete distance, physical and communicative, from me and my business interests. You can't be serious, my father said, his conciliatory mask slipping. We're your parents. You're going to legally ban us from contacting our own daughter? I'm giving you a choice, I clarified. You can sign this and walk away with your reputations intact and the money you already have, or you can refuse and face the consequences of your actions becoming public. After everything we did for you, my mother whispered, tears forming, real ones this time, I thought. How can you be so cold? I learned from watching you, I replied softly. This isn't what I wanted. It's what you created. The ensuing argument was brief but intense. My father's facade crumbled entirely when he realized I wouldn't budge, revealing the rage that I now understood had always simmered beneath the surface. My mother alternated between tearful pleas and cutting remarks about my character. In the end, with their legal options exhausted and the threat of public exposure looming, they signed. As security escorted them from the building, my father turned for one parting shot. You're just like him, cold, calculating, putting business before family. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Thank you. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Standing at the window, watching them leave, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what could have been, mixed with an unexpected lightness. The weight I had carried for months was lifting. I was finally free to move forward, unburdened by manipulation and false expectations. That evening, I drove to my grandfather's modest home, now my home, overlooking Lake Washington. Unlike his son, Grandpa had never seen the point of mansions or showiness, preferring the comfortable three-bedroom house he'd owned for 40 years. Walking through the rooms filled with his books, his modest furniture, and photographs documenting his life's journey, I felt his presence strongly. In his home office, I discovered a locked drawer in his desk that Mr. Hamilton had mentioned might contain personal journals. Using the key he had left me, I opened it to find decades of leather-bound notebooks, each filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting. Opening the earliest volume, I found an entry from 1982 that made my breath catch. Robert demanded another loan today. When I suggested he try building something of his own instead, he accused me of being ungenerous and controlling. Perhaps I failed him as a father, working so many hours when he was young. But at what point does a man become responsible for his own choices? At what point do I stop enabling behavior that serves no one well? The hardest business decision I ever made was selling my first company. The hardest personal decision may be setting boundaries with my only son. Tears streamed down my face as I read entry after entry documenting my grandfather's painful journey with my father, so similar to what I had just experienced. He had questioned himself, doubted his decisions, and grieved the relationship he wished he could have had, all while maintaining the boundaries necessary for his own well-being. In that moment, surrounded by his words, I understood that the true inheritance he had left me wasn't the money or the companies. It was the example of his integrity, his courage to make difficult choices, and his willingness to stand alone when necessary. I had not lost a family. I had simply discovered what had always been true and gained the wisdom to build something better. 6 months after the final confrontation with my parents, the William Wilson Foundation opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in downtown Seattle. Rather than placing my name on the building, I had chosen to honor my grandfather, establishing a space that combined a technology incubator, educational center, and grant-making foundation all under one roof. The foundation's mission, providing educational opportunities and technological resources to underprivileged students interested in STEM fields, reflected both my grandfather's values and my own passion. Our first initiative, a scholarship program for students from low-income backgrounds, had already selected its inaugural class of 50 recipients, each receiving full tuition and mentorship. I had chosen to make my home in my grandfather's modest house rather than purchasing a mansion or penthouse that would have been expected of someone with my wealth. Living among his books and memories gave me comfort during the ongoing healing process. In the evenings, I often sat in his study, reading through more of his journals, finding wisdom and unexpected parallels to my own journey. Money magnifies character, he wrote in one entry. It doesn't change who people are, it simply removes the constraints that kept their true nature hidden. Remember this when people show you who they are after money enters the equation. I had taken this lesson to heart, being extremely cautious about who I allowed into my inner circle. The team I assembled at the foundation and at Wilson Tech consisted of people selected for their character and values as much as their professional capabilities. Each underwent a thorough vetting process designed by security experts, not because I had become paranoid, but because I understood the responsibility that came with the position I now held. My friendship with Megan remained a cornerstone of my personal life. Unlike many who suddenly appeared claiming past connections when news of my inheritance broke, she had been there before the money and remained unchanged after it. "You're still the same nerd who helped me pass Computer Science 101, she teased during our weekly dinners. "Just with slightly better shoes now." Those dinners became an essential ritual, grounding me in normalcy when the rest of my life felt anything but normal. We made a pact never to discuss business or money for at least the first hour, focusing instead on books, movies, dating disasters, and other aspects of ordinary life that kept me connected to who I was beyond the inheritance. Surprisingly, over time I developed a genuine friendship with my cousin Samantha. After reaching out during the height of the family conflict, she had maintained contact, eventually confessing that her father, my Uncle James, had tried to pressure her into publicly supporting my parents' version of events. "I saw the same pattern in how they treated Grandpa," she explained during a lunch at a quiet cafe where we'd begun meeting monthly. "Always taking, never appreciating. I couldn't be part of that, even if it meant tension with my dad." Through Samantha, I learned that the extended family had largely moved on from the drama, my parents having crafted a face-saving narrative about reaching an amicable private arrangement regarding the inheritance. Few questioned this version, preferring comfortable fiction to complicated truth. As for my parents themselves, I maintained the distance established in our final agreement. Occasionally I would see their names mentioned in local society pages, living a scaled-back but still comfortable lifestyle funded by what remained of the money I had given them before understanding their true nature. According to Samantha, they rarely mentioned me anymore, having found it easier to essentially erase me from their narrative than explain the reality of our estrangement. The most unexpected development in my healing journey came through the Wilson Tech mentorship program I established in memory of my grandfather. Drawing inspiration from how he had mentored me, I created a structured program pairing industry veterans with promising young engineers from diverse backgrounds. Though I initially planned to participate only as a founder and financial backer, I found myself drawn to directly mentoring several young women in the program. 18-year-old Zoe, a brilliant programmer from a struggling single-parent household, particularly reminded me of myself at that age, passionate about technology but uncertain about belonging in the male-dominated industry. "I never thought someone like me could actually succeed in tech," she confessed during one of our sessions. "Everyone else seems to have connections or fancy degrees or parents who support them. My grandfather had none of those things," I told her, sharing his story of working 3 jobs to put himself through college. "What he had was persistence and belief in his own abilities. That's something no one can give you, but also something no one can take away." Watching Zoe and the other ments grow in confidence and skill became one of my greatest joys. Their success felt more meaningful than any corporate acquisition or investment return. Through them, I began to understand what had driven my grandfather to keep working well past the age when he could have comfortably retired. The satisfaction of creating opportunity for others was far more fulfilling than accumulating wealth for its own sake. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave alone, bringing his favorite flowers, simple white daisies that reminded him of the field behind his childhood home. The elegant granite headstone, engraved with his name and the dates of his remarkable life, stood in stark contrast to the ostentatious family mausoleum my parents had initially proposed. Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I spoke aloud the words I wished I could have said to him: "I understand now why you made the choice you did. Not just about the money, but about setting boundaries, about valuing character over connection, about the courage to stand alone when necessary." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead as I continued. "The foundation is doing well. We've helped 50 students this year, with plans to double that next year. Wilson Tech just launched a new healthcare initiative that's going to change how patient data is secured. I think you'd be proud." The wind picked up slightly, and I smiled at the timing. I miss our fishing trips and your terrible jokes. I miss your advice. But I'm following the path you showed me, choosing what's right over what's easy. As I placed the daisies at the base of the headstone, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for the past year. The inheritance had cost me the illusion of family, but it had given me something far more valuable, the truth, and the freedom to build a life based on that truth. Back at home that evening, I sat on the dock overlooking Lake Washington, watching the sunset just as my grandfather and I had done countless times. Opening his journal from 5 years earlier, I found an entry that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Took Harper fishing today. Unlike her father, she's more interested in the patience of the process than the size of the catch. She reminds me of myself at that age, curious, determined, unwilling to take shortcuts. I worry sometimes about what will happen when I'm gone, about the vultures that will circle. But watching her today, I realized she has something Robert never developed, a moral compass that doesn't waver based on who's watching. That will serve her better than any money I could leave her. He had seen me clearly, believed in me before I fully believed in myself. The greatest inheritance wasn't the billions in my bank accounts but this unshakable faith that I could weather whatever storms came my way. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, and the wounds of family betrayal would likely never completely heal. But I had built something new from the ashes of what was lost, a foundation of genuine relationships, meaningful work, and personal integrity. That night, I wrote the first entry in my own journal, starting a tradition that connected me to my grandfather even in his absence. Money reveals people's true nature, but it also reveals our own strength. The hardest part isn't managing the wealth, it's accepting the truths it exposes and having the courage to act accordingly. Grandpa knew this. Now I do too. And for the first time in a year, I slept peacefully through the night, no longer haunted by what I had lost, but grateful for what I had found along the way, my own voice, my own strength, and the wisdom to create a family of choice built on genuine love rather than financial interest. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family over money issues? Even if not billions, sometimes even small amounts can reveal character. Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, wishing you the strength to always choose what's right over what's easy.